Good afternoon, members. This afternoon, I'm here with Stephen Newell, our course manager. We've had a couple of great sessions with a couple of star professional golfers, Kari and Jeff, and with Ali excellently handling the hosting duties. So this week we thought we'd change it up, and I'm going to talk to Stephen Newell and about some of the things going on in Victoria and some of the background to getting here. So Stephen's had an amazing few years in Melbourne. We started with some power greens we asked Stephen to manage, and he spent a lifetime eradicating power, and then we asked him to rebuild a golf course in a few months, and he did that. Then he probably had 12 months of somewhat normality as we progressed for a while until COVID-19 took a turn for the worse and shut things down. So Stephen, it's great to have you here. Maybe you'd start by sharing a little bit about your background, your journey to Victoria Golf Club.
Thanks for having me, David. Yeah, well, I was brought up on the Ballaroon Peninsula, and coming to the end of my schooling, I wasn't, quite sure what to do. I loved the outdoor life. Played a lot of sports, not necessarily golf. Didn't play a lot of golf, and I saw a job advertised at the Lewis Golf Club. So I thought, geez, that'd be a pretty good way to spend your days, and put in for the job, and got that apprenticeship at Lewis Golf Club. Really enjoyed learning the trade there. Fortunate really to probably have very humble beginnings getting into the trade, because very small staff at Lewis, and every man was really relied on to do all sorts of things, mechanical repairs, and there was no sort of hierarchy there, as every man was sort of pretty equal. So had a really good grounding at Lewis Golf Club and really enjoyed it. I was there for 5 years, but could see that if I wanted to get ahead in the industry, that I moved to Melbourne onto one of the big Sandbelt clubs was going to be necessary. So I wrote away to all of the clubs, including Victoria. And as it turned out, I got a job at Metropolitan Golf Club. And I was very fortunate at the time. I think we started down there in 1990. Metropolitan was undergoing a lot of reconstruction work with draining fairways, changing turf types on fairways, reconstructing greens in preparation for the 1993 Australian Open. So in my time, my 8 years at Metropolitan, we hosted 1993 and 1997 Australian Opens, and they were very exciting times. Really opened up my eyes to what was capable at the top level of turf management and tournament preparation, and that was something that I really wanted to get into. And during my last couple of years at Metropolitan Golf Club there, I was through the summer watching golf on the TV, certainly over in South Australia. The likes of Greg Norman and Tom Lehman, I think, won a British Open there, and then come over to Adelaide and thought, gee, that course looked good on the TV. Put that in the back of my mind, and about 12 months or so later, that job became available. So I was 29 at the time, hadn't put in for any other jobs anywhere, but I put in for the job at Kooyonga. I'd never been to Adelaide before, but I travelled over there, and we went through the interview process. And as you do, they think long and hard about appointing any person, but a young person. And they put it to me, if we offer you the job, will you come over? And I said, I wouldn't put in the job if I wasn't fair income. So they offered me the job, and we packed up our young family at the time and headed over to Adelaide. And we were there for 19 years. Loved every minute of it. Was very fortunate to be involved in a lot of tournament preparation in Adelaide, and a lot of reconstruction work as well. We rebuilt all of the greens and resurfaced all the fairways, put an irrigation system in. We did a lot of work over the 19 years. And as I said, loved every minute of it. But when a big job like the Victoria Golf Club comes up, they're a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and I'd seen Victoria from afar for many years, and could see the potential, particularly in the turf quality that was there. and probably thought that my skills matched what the club was looking for. So again, we put in for the job. And luckily, again, I suppose, the harder you work, the luckier you get, but we got lucky. And we, want to say we, my wife and I, the family, we're offered the job and, a chance to get back to Melbourne around family, and a chance, I suppose, selfishly for me to continue my career at a great course where I could make an impact. And again, we haven't looked back. We've been here for 3 years and loved every moment of it.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. No, I think we also consider ourselves fortunate to have secured you, Stephen. So you've done a great job so far, and I'm sure you'll continue to. Having spent a long period of time in Adelaide and previously in Melbourne and now back in Melbourne, it might be interesting just to talk about the differences between the sort of environments in Adelaide, some of the different challenges you might have managing a course in Adelaide or a course like Kooyonga versus a course like Victoria.
Yeah, well, we were managing very similar turf types in Adelaide with the creeping bent grass on the greens and Santa Ana on the fairways. Probably the major difference was, certainly the climate. Very hot, dry, long summers in Adelaide. It took me, a little while to get my head around that, having been brought up in Victoria. Never seen anything like it. Hot days, hot nights, and long growing seasons. Very short dormancy periods for the turf, and that generally relates into a higher cost per hectare to manage turf in Adelaide because of the longer growing season and the inputs that are required to ready your turf for those long summers. The other big difference in Adelaide, we had access to both recycled water and bore water. It's critical in that environment, but certainly not unusual for us to use, or for them, or for us at the time at Kooyonga to use, towards 250 megalitres of water a year over the course. And, in Melbourne here, we're using about 100 megalitres. So, with a new irrigation system that we've got, more sophisticated control systems and pumping systems, we will certainly be better prepared going forward to conserve our water and get the water that we've got exactly where we need it and make that go as far as we can. Surprisingly, the water quality between the bore water in Adelaide and the bore water in Melbourne is not a lot of difference. In fact, what helps us in Melbourne at least is the fact that we get a lot more natural rain and it leaches any accumulated salts and bicarbonates out of the soils that are a result of the bore water. So we didn't get so much of the flushing and leaching in Adelaide, but you certainly seem to in Melbourne. So they're the main differences, I think.
So at a high level, having moved back to the Sandbelt and obviously having a background in the Sandbelt, just some of the sort of fundamentals about how you think a Sandbelt course should play, should present, some of the sort of things you're aiming to deliver as a course manager at a Sandbelt golf course.
Yeah, I think one of the things, looking from afar and being involved in Sandbelt golf is, people have an expectation, where they arrive at a Sandbelt club. They expect, firm surfaces, firm fairways, firm greens, fast greens. So that's something that, we're mindful of. I think the other thing with Sandbelt golf is that, it's generally on, immaculate turf, but it's not always green. Green is not always good. Thick rough is not something that we want to really see on Sandbelt courses. One of the features of the Sandbelt courses are the low cut around the greens where balls run off that give people more options to get their ball, up and about around the hole. Quite different to some of the golf that we've seen in America over the last few weeks, which me personally found very uninteresting. And totally, foreign to the Sandbelt environment. The Sandbelt's very lucky to have a vast array of very interesting native grasses as well that are a big part of the courses that interact with and sort of frame the courses very well. And in more recent times, and probably Victoria was one of the instigators, there has been the introduction of a little bit more sand through the courses. In Melbourne's sand belt, again, people have an expectation they come down, certainly with the natural bunkers that we have, but also in more recent times, broken ground through the rough and just a little bit more sand splashes that I think is a real feature. So that's what we're sort of trying to do, keep the firmness in the ground, nurture the natural flora that we're lucky to have, and frame that with beautiful bunkering and good turf.
It sounds good. Sounds the way to go. In sort of with all the work we've done in recent times at the golf course, we introduced Pure Distinction as our preferred species of bent grass on the greens. So it's a relatively new species, although it's derived from a long family of Pentcross varieties. So I think it'd be interesting to have a bit of a talk about how it's actually performed, how it's performed against your expectations as a new grass type, and does it require any specific management techniques that are perhaps more unique to it than some other grass types you've experienced?
Yeah, well, the Pure Distinction is a very new, modern, bred turf grass. It has very fine leaves, very sort of slower horizontal growth, more vertical growth. From the literature where it was bred in America, it can be prone to accumulating thatch in organic matter over a period of time, and I know that's something that we have done with our greens now. 2 years old, I think. Might have sown our first green sort of this week, a couple of years ago, as it turns out, that we've been very conscious in monitoring and measuring the accumulating thatch, which will happen naturally over time. But with these newer varieties, they are more aggressive and prone to building up thatch. So what we've done to combat that is, keeping them as lean as we can, not putting as much fertiliser on them, dusting them as regularly as we can. That's going to be critical to the long-term success of the greens. But generally speaking, we found the turf to be very good. It's very fine, very dense. It seems to withstand a lot of pitch marking. It'll bruise a little bit, but certainly the surface is not tearing away. It's probably what you describe as a fast grass. It's a faster grass to putt on, very smooth. Certainly under our current maintenance regimes, we've probably seen a little bit more turf disease in the greens than what we would want to. And we're probably still finding a balance, the right amount of nutrition to keep the turf a little bit more resilient. And that's not just at Victoria Golf Club. This is a trend that we have seen at other clubs in Victoria. So it's obviously new to Australia. We're starting to find out a few little things about it as we go along. We must also keep in mind that the turf is still very young, and it's not unusual to see some minor problems, at least with new turf over the first couple of years. But all in all, we've been very happy with it. And we're very mindful of looking to manage it for the long term. So, the dusting, keeping it as lean as we can, that's going to prolong the life of the greens. So, we're very mindful of that. We want to get as many years out of them as we possibly can. So, all in all, so far so good.
So next sort of topic is the inverse and opposite to perhaps bent grass, and Power Annua, which is a worldwide challenge for turf managers, whether they be a golf course or a turf stadium, etc. Can you explain a little bit about why Power Annua is so problematic, and perhaps describe some of your management techniques and the challenges it presents?
Yeah, well, Poa annua is generally a very weak type of grass. It is prone to drying out in the summer, and that's okay if you want to drought it out. But if you're trying to grow it, it can leave you in all sorts of problems. It's very prone to disease and insect attack, and generally speaking, it costs you more to maintain Poa surfaces than pure bent grass. Although there is some cost in keeping Poa annua out of bent grass also. Generally speaking, Poa annua surfaces, particularly greens, are more bumpy to putt on. It's a prolific seeder, even at any height. And you know, I've basically forged my career out of trying to, as you say, eradicate it. I wasn't that wrapped in, maintaining the Poa greens here for a couple of years, but anyway, that's all behind me. I hope I never have to do that again. So yeah, there's not a lot going for it. Not a lot going for it at all.
Yeah, terrific. Certainly our ambition, Stephen, is shared with yours, that we don't want to have you maintaining Poa annua greens ever again either. So
yeah,
we certainly share that objective. So another grass species that members may not be so familiar with is fescue, and typically there's been a little bit of fescue around the golf course at different times, but you've proactively done a bit of work with fescue in some of the areas, in shade areas, but also on the bunker tongues adjacent to green. So again, you might just explain to members, what you're doing with fescue, what you see as its advantages might be, and some of the benefits of fescue.
Yeah, certainly fescue does grow very well in the shade, and we have used that under some prominent cypress trees around the place. It does very well in that environment. The other big advantage with fescue is that we can control any weed through fescue, and that includes Parramatta grass, kikuyu, cooch, and Poa annua. So there's a big advantage there. It has a very good drought tolerance, and again, generally, if it's left alone and not cut often, it will become wispy and set an attractive seed head, and not as thick as cooch. Cooch can have to grow very high for balls to nestle into it and be lost. So it's been used more often in recent times on the sandbelt golf courses. Some clubs are using it as a low-cut fine turf, which does very well, and other clubs are using it sparsely through their roughs, where it will, as I said, set a attractive seed head, and the newer cultivars are less likely to go clumpy like some of the older cultivars. It's a very good turf, and one of the biggest things, as I mentioned, was the fact that we can control all weeds in the fescue.
When you say that means it's tolerant of any herbicide treatments, whereas other bent grass you can't put herbicide treatment. I think that's what you mean by that.
Yes, yeah. There's a couple of herbicides that basically won't touch the fescue, but they'll take out all other weeds. So it's very handy.
Yeah. Okay. So the other major grass variety on the golf course is the Santa Ana cooch. I think members, when they returned from when we first opened up the temporary course at the back end of the 2-month closure, the early stages of the Greens Replacement Project, were horrified to see our fairways that we'd stripped of the Santa Ana and reused to resod tees and surrounds. Can you talk about the recovery of those areas and how they compare to the other areas that weren't lifted, and sort of some of the management challenges that presents to you over time, or some of the processes you might need to implement over time to actually align the sort of behaviour of those areas?
Yeah, the harvest areas, I think, have recovered really very well. Might have been one or two little spots that lingered on longer than we would have liked, but yeah, I think generally they've recovered very well. They're still a little bit bumpy, more bumpy than I would like, and we will look to perhaps core, hollow tine core those areas later on in the growing season when the turf is actively growing, and rub that material back into top dress those areas. We may put a little bit of extra sand on to take the hollows out, but generally, very happy with the way that they have recovered. It must also be sort of mentioned that harvesting those areas probably saved us $250,000 worth of buying turf, and the turf we were buying probably wasn't as good as we had on site. There were a few headaches there, but we got over that. Anyway,
possibly a few backaches too.
Yeah, there was. That we see with the harvest areas, which is not surprising but interesting, is the fact that the turf grows more healthier on the areas that we've harvested. We see less incidence of weed and insect and disease attacks on the harvest areas, and that's because as we lifted the turf, we took out the thatch with it. So there's better water infiltration through the harvest areas. They require less water, and the turf generally grows healthier with less inputs over the whole year. So that sort of indicates that going forward, and at some time, in the next year or so, that there should be some type of renovation to the rest of the fairways to take out a little bit of the thatch, to improve the surfaces, that certainly get the water in, firm the surfaces, take out any imperfections around any irrigation trenches. We'll probably be looking at not scarifying the fairways, but there's a couple of other less intrusive renovations that we do, either verti-cutting or even raking the grass up a little bit and then cutting it back down. But what we have seen by removing the thatch through the harvest areas certainly points towards some renovation on the rest of the fairways to even them up. And as I said, we see a healthier growing environment with that reduction of thatch.
Thanks, Steve. So having talked about cooch on the fairways, the post the greens replacement project, and then with the really good early summer or midsummer rains this year, the cooch flourished in some areas of the rough, which is not highly desirable, as you said. What's your sort of view, as you described the rough, you talked about typical sandbelt roughs and things like that. So what's the sort of process with where there's cooch in the rough, and how do you go about managing it so it doesn't get that sort of density and heaviness?
Yeah, it certainly was a good but strange summer. This year, last year, where we were getting regular rainfall, and certainly stimulating the roughs, particularly the cooch in the roughs. What we've done to keep as much water off the roughs as we can is in our irrigation design, which they call hard edge. So we've placed the sprinklers around the edges of the fairway, so we're watering into the fairways and no water goes onto the roughs. So we can limit the amount of irrigation that goes onto the roughs, but we can't limit the amount of rain that goes onto the roughs. So in a typical year, we would expect to see the roughs dry out, become wispy, even a little bit of sand going through the canopy. And that's been the experience of other clubs that have had the hard edge irrigation installed over the last few years. Last summer, with the rain and the turf certainly stimulated and got thicker than we would warrant or would like in a few areas. I'm not opposed to certainly mowing the rough. One way of controlling the growth, even scarifying the roughs in the coochie areas to control the density that is there, and even chemically treating the roughs to brown them off and thin them out. I think, again, generally speaking, that the common couches that we've got in the rough will form some part of our roughs going forward. They will help hold, some of the sandy areas together during times of drought. They've just got to be managed a little differently in years like we've just had gone by. But there are things that we can do to thin the canopies out so that people can find their ball and have a decent shot of progressing it forward.
Yep. Thanks, Stephen. So looking forward, we've got the Aussie Open at Victoria in 2022, which is obviously going to be a really significant event for the golf club and a very significant event for you, I'm sure. So I think it'd be just instructive to understand a bit about, when preparations sort of start in a broad sense and a more detailed sense, maybe, or nearer to the time. What does the works program look like to get ready for a major tournament like that? And the other part of it is, what's the relationship between Victoria, the golf club, and you as course manager and the principals who run and control the tournament? I mean, how much say do you have in things and how much sort of input and those sort of experiences?
Yeah, well, the Australian Open's never really far from our minds in our day-to-day activities. We're starting to build, or wanting to build at least a skilled course staff. We've brought people from far and wide, and we're still looking to make some appointments, but we want to get our team settled and properly trained. We've tried to expose some of our younger, inexperienced people to other tournament preparations around the country. We've sent a couple over to Adelaide the last few years to help prepare for the Women's Australian Open. We're very keen to send some guys up to Kingston Heath when they have the tournament coming up. So it'll expose our guys to what's going on at other clubs, and they'll bring that back to us. So that's going to be important, that we get the team settled and well trained and ready. We're also looking at upgrading our machinery fleet slowly but surely. We want to have the right equipment at hand to get the job done as efficiently and as good as we can. And there are constant thoughts about what we'll do with the turf leading into the tournament. With renovations, as I said, about fairways and greens, we've got to work back from the tournament, when we know when that's going to be, as to when and how we will sort of renovate turf the year out to have the best possible surfaces for the tournament when it comes around. As far as working with Golf Australia, and the club, I think it's important that, certainly, I or my team deliver, what parameters the club and Golf Australia put down. It's not about, so much about what I want. I mean, the club's got to be happy with the way that that we're going to present the course. Australia will have some parameters, and we'll work with them very closely. I've been lucky to manage quite a few sort of professional tournaments, and I know a lot of the guys at Golf Australia, and we get along very well with them. But it'll be my job to deliver what they want as far as green speeds, cutting heights, width of fairways, heights of rough. But in saying that, the club's got to be happy with all of that as well. So it's going to be a 2 or 3 way partnership. I'll certainly put my opinions forward if I think necessary, or if I see something that offer my expertise, so to speak, because I know the ground pretty well. But otherwise, we'll do whatever the people ask us to do, with the end goal of having people come to Victoria Golf Club and go away very happy. And whatever happens, we want to enhance our reputation as a golf course, our worldwide ranking. That'll be what we want to do and what we want to see.
Thanks, sir. So one other question on sort of the golf industry and the relationship between the clubs. I mean, there's a competitive pride between the clubs, and I'm sure there's a competitive pride between the course managers of the various clubs and things like that. But I also think there's a pretty good relationship. So it might be just interesting to talk about, how you feed off each other, given this very significant changes we've made in Victoria, how much interest there's been from other clubs in what we've done. Just how you actually work together to, develop your skills and learn from each other as well.
Yeah, well, I'm very lucky that we have a Sandbelt superintendents group that meet a few times a year. And I've known those guys over the years for many years and get along with them really well. And we meet and discuss our successes and failures, and there's very little, held to the chest. We're all very open, and that's really very good. As I said, we have good relationships between the clubs. We share machinery, we share ideas. We're never more than a phone call away to help out our colleagues. And yes, whilst there is a little bit of competitiveness, we all want to be the best, or at least the best we can be. There's no trouble in getting any advice or help from anybody around the place as well. And what was the second part of the question there?
Just how much interest, how much you can get with what we've been doing here.
Yeah. Well, there has been a lot of interest, a lot of site visits from, clubs from right around Australia, to be honest. But certainly some of the colleagues in the Sandbelt have had a look and picked our brains on how we did it, with a view of, perhaps starting some bigger projects around the place as well. So, again, where we can pass on our knowledge and our experiences, we're happy to do that. I'm glad that's all behind us and in front of them, but certainly we can help wherever we can. We're happy to.
And I'll finish off with the question that's probably the one that all members are thinking at the moment, given they've had a couple of months away from a place that they very much like spending time at. So how's the course at the moment? How's it going to come up when we're able to come back and play?
Well, it should be remembered that we've only been on essential maintenance with limited staff, but I will say that the course is in really good condition. It's come out of spring unbelievably. You would think that we've put bulk fertiliser on the fairways. The fact that we had to put a lot of harsh chemicals on the fairways this winter to control Poa annua has really given the Santa Ana a new lease of life, and it's just jumped out of the ground. So the fairways are looking, quite lush. They're beginning to grow and fill in any divots. So I'm very encouraged with the way that the fairways are presenting at the moment. We're cutting more often than we would probably like, but that's a problem that we're glad to have. The greens are coming along very nicely. We're just going to put some fertiliser on them next week. Didn't want to overstimulate them through winter when there's a little bit more Poa annua about, but spring is here. We're gonna get the greens growing, cut them more often. Done some work in the bunkers this week, removing a bit of debris. Looks like we're getting good rain through the early part of spring, so there's hardly a divot or a pitch mark on the whole place, as you can imagine, and that's every golf manager's dream. But we really want to see golf back, and we're looking forward to seeing golf back, and we expect many months of a lot of golf over the next few months when that's allowed. But the course is in very good shape, and we're looking forward to seeing everybody back very soon.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. I think you echo the sentiments of everyone who will listen in on this, that the membership is dying to get back out there and start to enjoy the fruits of all your labours. And so thank you again, Stephen. And for the members, just a small note, yesterday was International Superintendent's Day. So congratulations on International Superintendent's Day, Stephen. I hope you had a glass of fine wine last night to celebrate or whatever, but...
I didn't, but I might have one tonight. Thank you, David, and thanks for having me. And as I said, looking forward to seeing you all back on the course very soon.
Thanks, Stephen. Catch up soon.
Thank you. Bye. Am I going to leave?
Yep. I'll do it.